Hola, hello. Welcome to another episode, the We Should Talk series of bilingual Spanish English conversation, host and producer by Yannis Lobaina. This episode, I am so happy and so grateful to connect with a very special person I just met last year, but I am so touched by her uh, writing and lifestyle. So I must say that. So, in this episode is the first episode of 2024, and it will be in English. As you know, sometimes I do episode in my own language in Spanish, and other time in English, which I am bear with me. Sometimes my pronunciation is terrible and my English is terrible sometimes, but we are here multilingual place. So without further ado, let me introduce my special guest, Nadja Lubiw-Hazard, who is a writer and author of a beautiful wrestling novel, The Nap Away Motel. And also she have a few upcoming children chapter books as well. TC and Me, which I am so excited to read because it's fixing ways to love a mink, and I love mink, so I am already in that. Naka, let me say, I invite Naka to this podcast because we met in 2023, at the end of 2023, in a workshop I took. In a long workshop, it was 8 weeks, a beautiful 8 week. And I was so fascinated because her workshop was fully connected with the wild animals and the wild world. And we spent 8 weeks talking about animals. And it was the most beautiful week I spent in my whole life, I must say. So now that it was a work before as a veterinarian. So we will talk about that today. And then she decided to turn fully the full-time author and writing and dedicate to the writing and to be a mentor and workshop facilitator, as I say mentioned before. So she's a lifelong animal lover. Of course, we will check that in this conversation, and a long time vegan. Her writing often explore that theme around the natural world, and I will encourage you to check Naha website because it's she have a lot of beautiful writing there. She's very active in that world, and I find fascinating how she write about animals that sometimes we are not appreciate so much, like a chicken or piggy and other animals. So, and also, I will say, let's go to say, welcome Naha to this episode today.
Well, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Yannis. And thank you so much, of course, for inviting me. It's such a pleasure.
My honor, my honor. I really, since we met, as I said before, I have been so fascinated with all the stuff that you do and follow you. And so it's an honor that you accept. So thank you so much. Before we start, let's go to start to talk back how a veterinarian, being in the world of veterinarian as a profession, uh, help you to write these stories that you are now in this world now?
That's a really great question. So I have a little bit of a troubled relationship with veterinary medicine. I will say that. I grew up so fond of animals and with such an affinity for animals, but vet school itself was very difficult. And I got exposed to a lot of things that I wasn't prepared for, how animals are treated in, the industrial factory farming system and how animals are used in research. And of course, the university does a great deal of research on animals and with animals. And then probably the worst of it all was the way that we were taught some things, using healthy animals to, learn surgery, for example. And so, I graduated vet school. I worked as a vet for several years. And I had thought it was my sort of purpose or my calling, but I discovered, first of all, that I didn't love medicine itself that much. So that was one struggle. And the other is being a veterinarian is a very difficult career. Veterinarians have a much higher suicide rate than the average person. The job itself has so many challenges around ethics. So you might be faced with an animal that is young, needs some treatment or surgery that they could recover from, but the client doesn't have the money. And so you're left with these, ethical struggles all the time. And so I think the term for it is, ethical fatigue. I think that's a thing that vets suffer. So one thing that definitely influenced my writing was actually writing about that experience. For me, writing and expressing how I felt during that time was really therapeutic, but it also made for a very good story. So I wrote a creative nonfiction piece that was one of the first things I got published. It was in Room magazine, and it was about my time in veterinarian college. And I think the other thing I would say is that, a couple other things. One is, being a veterinarian and spending time with people who have their companions. It's so clear how strong the human animal bond is, how important animals are to us, how much joy they can bring to our lives, what that relationship means to people. So I think of course I knew it for myself, but to see it in so many other people really validated it.
Yes, you have a cat and a dog. No?
Yes, I have a cat. We don't have the dog any longer.
Oh.
So we just have one cat. But I think at my most, I had 4 cats and 2 dogs.
Poor
But
cat.
yeah, once I had children, that calmed down a little bit. But yeah, for sure, it's important for me to always have an animal. And then I guess, that time in veterinarian school, sort of learning about how society views and treats animals in different ways, is a topic that I visit a lot. I write a lot about our troubled relationship with nature, how we think we're separate from nature, how we've lost our connection. And because of that, we're in this environmental crisis that we're in.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I agree with you. And also that's one of my question as well. How challenging having to connect that gap that we have as a human being with a non-human system. For you as having that experience as a veterinarian, all the ethical issue that you explained to us, and also bring that to the in the writing place. How was for you the acceptation maybe to the other to the society or the readers maybe? How do you find it was accepted, or they understood what do you try the break that gap?
Yeah, interesting question. I mentioned this piece of writing that I did that was creative nonfiction, but I would say that that's not really my genre. So I really love to write fiction, especially I love to write novels, but I write a lot of short stories too. And it's interesting because the very first bit of writing I did was right after I left my career, and I was taking care of my young daughter. And I wrote these series of essays, and they were all about animal rights and animal issues. And when I look back at them now, I mean, they were very, very heartfelt. They were very genuine, but they also came across very didactic, like I was telling someone what they should believe or how they should believe things, or see what this experience of mine was, and then that means that everyone should feel this way. So they were they were too didactic. They were too sort of top heavy. And writing fiction has been such a release or a gift for me, because you're creating these characters and they're, three-dimensional, and they might have some beliefs that match what I believe, but they might have other beliefs. They might, take one issue that, is important to me. I might sort of weave that into the story. But I think by connecting with an individual character, it's much easier to write about big issues like this.
That's amazing. That's connect me with another question I have here. I would like if you can share a little bit with our audience, what are the main topics that you are passionate about exploring about, and also talk about a little bit the Not Away Motel, the novel. I have in my book list just long time ago to read it. So I must say I didn't read it yet, but it's there in my list because I love it. It feels like a very beautiful novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as you can imagine from our conversation so far, of course, one of the main themes or things that I write about are animals. I feel like I was born with some genetic predisposition to love animals. I don't know. And I know, Yannis, you love animals very much as well. So I was this kid who loved animals. I grew up we had cats in the household and kittens, and I really wanted a dog, but we got a guinea pig, but I loved the guinea pig too. We had a rabbit. So, just that childhood with animals and also reading about animals. Oh my goodness. There were so many books that I loved that had, young women or girls who, rescued animals, and I wanted to be all of them, of course, Charlotte's Web, and I'm thinking of that series of books by Monica Dickens called The House at World's End, where they have a bunch of kids who somehow have no parents and are just rescuing and helping all these animals. And so yeah, when I write, I still feel like there's that little kid inside of me who just loves animals so much and wants to write about, the joy of animals and the excitement and the awe and, the love for animals. And then, of course, I've mentioned a little bit about, becoming an animal advocate, I guess, through some of my experiences, around the way society treats animals. And so that's also a topic that I address. We're talking about this little the children's book that I've just written. The topic that it addresses is mink farming. And I think a lot of people in Canada know how many fur farms we have in our country, how many different types of animals are farmed for fur, and also the connection to COVID, because minks get COVID. And so in other countries, they've had to shut down fur farms. Some countries have banned fur farming. And so, that's an issue that is important to me, and I want people to know about it, but I don't want to come at it like, you shouldn't have fur farms. It was so much more sort of, I guess, creative energy that went into telling a story about a little girl who discovers that, oh my goodness, there's these animals on these fur farms, and what can we do about it for her, because she felt very passionate about it. So that for sure is something that I write about.
That's an amazing point. What did you say? How sometimes, or sometimes not, all the time, I'm sure, literature or poetry or any other gender can help us to advocate for what we think. And it's a better way to canalize all that energy, creative energy, and something more specific. Find your purpose to write.
That's a good question. Good question. Yeah. I guess you have to, identify what your purpose is, as you're trying to find your purpose. And I think for me, it's been kind of a circuitous route, and my purpose, I think, has changed over time. So, when I did graduate vet school, I thought that was my purpose, and it turned out it wasn't. But that didn't mean the purpose was helping animals. I think that has always been a thread that runs through, but how I do that has changed. So, I started doing animal advocacy work, which was very meaningful for me as well. When I had my daughters, though, that brought a huge amount of purpose to my life. I felt very fulfilled. I know some people, family parents might struggle with that, stay at home time, and how isolating it might be, and also how like you feel like you're sucked into motherhood, like nothing else exists. But for me, it was a very, very meaningful and fulfilling time, and I found a great deal of purpose being a mother. And then finally I came to writing. I also did some teaching, so teaching became very important to me. Like once my kids were in school, I started thinking about education and the education system, and how, kids are sponges, right? They're just sucking everything up, and how their education influences them. So I actually did get involved in teaching kids in a lot of different ways about animals. And that was meaningful for me as well. But writing, I think is something that I would say that's my true purpose, this creative being that I am. And yeah, how did I end up as a writer? I'm trying to think, how did I find this purpose? But I guess I guess I always loved I always loved books. So I think that perhaps is the core. I always loved reading so much. When I was a kid, my bicycle, my books, and animals, those are like what made my world for me. And that love of reading, I think, translated into, a love of writing for me. Oh, sorry. Yannis, one of the other things that you will find a lot in my writing, that I'd say the next most common theme is around mental illness.
Yes.
My father had a bipolar mood disorder. I have a bipolar mood disorder, as well as an anxiety disorder. And it's had a huge impact on my life. It had a huge impact on my childhood, and then my own struggles have had a big impact on my life, and has limited me in some ways. And so, if I look at my body of work, like my novels, some aren't published yet, but the novels I've written and the short stories I've written, I've written characters with PTSD, characters with anxiety, characters with psychosis, characters with depression, characters with suicide ideation. And it's really, really important to me. It's important to me because of the influences it had on me. So it's my personal experience. But I think one of the reasons it's so important to me is because there's such stigma still around mental health, right? Around mental illness. And, that stigma can lead to shame, right? And shame leads to, closing the door, like not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to share it, not wanting to admit it. And so for me, it's kind of like keeping that door open, for myself personally, but also for people who are readers, to read about characters who have these struggles, and it's a big part of their life and a big part of their identity. But at the same time, how, maybe we see all the other facets of their life. It's not just this, it's all of this. So, creating these characters that are three-dimensional, and that, may have a mental illness, but may also be, a fantastic artist, or, an incredible mother. So that's really important for me to write about. And then I guess that leads right into the Napaway Motel, because one of the characters is a teenager who has a psychotic break. That's part of the storyline. So that was just me weaving in, a little bit of my identity as someone who struggles with mental illness. But the novel, it's really interesting when I think about the novel. It's got three main characters. Well, actually four, really. But it's got a young teenager, it's got a child, and it's got a middle-aged Muslim man. And each of them really are me in a way. So, the Muslim man is a father, very devoted to his family, and very much based on how I feel about my daughters, and how tight my family is. And then the little kid is this kid who, she's just off doing her own thing. She has a very rich imagination. She makes up a lot of magical stories about things, and she really loves animals. She finds a litter of kittens behind this motel that they're living in. So, there's me again. And then the teenager is just, they're twins, and the one twin has run away after this psychotic break. And so there's this teenager who's trying to understand what has happened to their twin brother, trying to understand the mental illness and what it means, and how it has torn them apart, much the way my family might be described as being torn apart by mental illness as well. So yeah, the novel really connects a lot of those parts of me together, I guess.
Yeah,
The opportunity to share that as well.
no, it's very important. So other question here I would like to is about, as you see, my podcast I have a motherhood subject very clear, and I would like to ask you how you balance, or how was that time? Now your kids are big, your daughters, but how you was, how was the challenge to balance that time, the career as a mother, as a writer, as a full-time worker as well? No, we call that because we work all the time.
Yes.
So how you balance that? If you have some tips or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think back and remember that time. My daughters are in their 20s now, and I'm like, they seem like different people than those children that they were. But I chose to stay at home for quite a few years when my daughters were little. So I went back when my youngest was in grade 1, I think. So there was a period of time where I was only working at home or from home. And that was the time when I started to write really seriously. And I guess one of the things that was a discovery for me was that, not a discovery, but a learning curve, I guess, was that I could do these writing in these little bursts. I'd have the one daughter off in kindergarten, the other one would be having a nap, and I'd sit down at my computer and start writing, So I learned very, very quickly to write whenever that opportunity arose. Some people need, oh, you've got to have the tea here, and you've got to have this beautiful little cottage in your backyard that has, flowers all around it. No, like I was at the kitchen table, dirty dishes, laundry, and there I was writing a story. So the nice thing is that skill carried through. So I can very easily just sit down at my computer, and if I've been working on a story, it's in my mind, right? It's percolating up there, and it will just, spill out. So that for sure was one way I came through that challenge. Yeah.
That's amazing. You mentioned that type the writer, because when I say to the normal people or to the other people they know in the writing or the artists, well, you say, oh, I am a writer, or I am, oh, you live. No, that's not the real life. The real life, we have to carve any moment you have and write, and more when you decide to be a mother or parents or family. It's another, you have to do anytime. And yes, it's nice that you mentioned that, because for me, it's I wrote in my head all the time, and then try to pass that by hands or in the computer while I'm in the dishes, doing the kitchen stuff.
Yes.
That's my time there. Sometimes put the note down, and yes. Thank you so much for telling that. That's amazing. Now let's go to keep talking. I would like to have more longer conversation and have like a dedicate to your writing, because that's now your main focus, right? So I would like to know who are the biggest influence in your career as an author. I know you are avid reader. As I saw before, you mentioned a lot of the authors, and like me, we love reading all the time. So that's a hard question, I know, but if you mentioned a few.
There's so many people that I can think of, but I'm thinking of people that have inspired me, maybe not just as an author, but as a person, and I guess as someone who loves animals and advocates for them as well. So the first person, who is someone I admire so much is Jane Goodall. And she went off and lived in the jungle and studied chimpanzees. And of course, I wish, when I knew about her, I wish that was me. I wish I could have had that opportunity. But she's a prolific author. She's written many, many books, some directly about chimpanzees, but some just about our world and about the state of our world. And she often writes and speaks about hope, and I think that's a really powerful message, because we're in a time where a lot of people feel very hopeless about the future, feel like there's nothing they can do, feel like this crisis that we're in is has an inevitable ending, and it's not a good ending. And she speaks out to that, I think. So I've admired her. I've met her a couple times, and just influenced me as a writer, I guess, just to write my own truths. She doesn't write fiction, but that doesn't mean it doesn't speak to her as a storyteller. And also, I guess really, living a life of in line with what she values. I think that's what I really admire.
That's beautiful. Yes, we have
Yeah.
that in common. I love her as well, and yes, being aligned with our value, as you mentioned, is the hard topic.
Yes.
The hard as a human being, and yes, thank you.
Yeah. And then I'm thinking of another author who, again, didn't just influence me, as a writer or to become a writer, but it was her sort of politics. So her name's Carol J. Adams. She's written many nonfiction books. And the one that I read when I was in my very young 20s was called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And it's about women, and it's about animals, and it's about meat eating, and it's about violence towards women. And just, I hadn't read anything like that before, and I was so taken with it. And it really shaped my politics, my interest around, the intersectionality of oppression, right? For me, it was sort of like, whoa, really eye-opening. And again, she's a very prolific author. She writes what she believes in. She's influenced many, many people with her feminism and her veganism sort of combined together. She does this slideshow that is quite shocking. If anyone is interested, it's very worthwhile looking up. Just some of the images that you start to see how we might treat women and animals and people of color. And, the hierarchy, right? Like in patriarchy, there's, nature is less than, and women are less than, and animals are less than. So really interesting to think about for me.
That's wonderful. No, definitely, we have to check that, and yes, I will put in the link there as well.
Oh yeah, great.
All the books you mentioned. Yes. I love to do that, because sometimes we have to get back to the really topics that still 20 years ago we are still fighting for the same issue.
Yes.
And for me, it's as a mother, it's kind of shock all the time when I have to explain to my daughter a few subjects like the eating, the food we eat, our body, or mental health, or relationship with the world surrounded, how we can balance that, and be sincere, and be like it's not just for social media or for writing nice thing. It's to be aligned, as you said before, with your value as a human, but also as a common person, as a human being. I always like to say human being, because we are human, we are no other things.
Yeah, I like that about being authentic, right?
Authentic, yes, that's the word I was trying. Authentic, yes. We can talk a little bit. As we say, we live in this complex moment. How do you get your resilience from? You mentioned hope. I can see and I know you always enjoy nature like me.
Yes.
So tell um, tell us a little bit, where
Yeah.
did you get that resilience and how you encourage? Because that's part of the
Yeah. It's it's a very interesting question for me, Yannis, because my first reaction to it is to say I'm not I'm not resilient. And I guess that's interesting for me to unpack a little bit.
that's good.
If I'm describing my personality, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't say I'm resilient, but of course I am resilient. So it was just interesting the little, I guess,
Twist.
the thoughts that popped up there. But I have for sure gone through very difficult experiences and trying times, and I do have resilience, and I think perhaps one of the biggest things that helps me be resilient is actually my writing. Even though I'm writing fiction, a lot of times I'm writing about things that have affected me. And sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. And I'll look at the story later and I'll be like, oh, that story was about this, this thing in my life. So, I guess one example I would give is the first novel that I wrote. And I wrote it, when my daughters were young. And it was the story about a woman who loses her daughter at a very young age. So she's struggling with the death of her child. And that's not an experience I've had. But I think partly having those two vulnerable little babies, kind of opened my heart up in a way that made me feel so vulnerable. I thought, what if I lost them? So I guess there was the fear there of losing them. But the story was about grief. And I was struggling with a lot of grief at that time. I had 3 losses kind of back to back. My father, who had a brain tumor, was in palliative care and he died very slowly. And so there was the loss of my father, and attached to that was a lot of stuff around, my past relationship with him as well. And then I lost my soulmate dog, my very first dog that I ever rescued. And that broke my heart too. And then I had a miscarriage. And those 3 things kind of became one thing, this huge grief that I was carrying. And I'm sure, Yannis, you've had your griefs as well. And I'm sure your listeners, each of us have had our griefs. And that can be a really difficult thing to overcome. I guess overcome is not the right word, but to sort of,
Heal, no?
to accept it and to heal from it and to have it not be like all consuming, right? It begins to settle down a little bit, and you can open yourself up to doing more things and, getting involved with more things. And so I think writing about grief was really therapeutic and really helped my resilience in terms of, healing from my own grief.
That's beautiful that you mentioned that, and I'm sorry for that, for your
Oh,
father.
thank you.
No, yes, we all have grief, and I find that talk about and write about is the best way to grow that in another dimension and maybe
Yeah.
help us to a little bit. We say in Spanish sanar. It's like a heal, but sanar is like a more deep.
Yeah, I'm trying to find another word and I can't find it.
Yeah,
So maybe that's the word I was looking for.
I
I
don't
didn't
know,
know it.
sanar. I like sanar because it's like another. It doesn't mean but the heal, but more
Yeah,
deep. When you have something more
yeah,
deep, you can find it
yeah.
everywhere now.
Yeah, this past summer I read this most amazing book. I can't remember the author's name, but the book title is The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And it's about grief. The whole book was about grief. And I just learned so much. I didn't know a lot about all the different sort of types of grief we might have, but also just around all these wonderful sort of ways to honor it, to really acknowledge it and honor it. And so that's a book I'd recommend. I can email you the author's name later.
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We will
Yeah. And then
definitely
in
put it
terms of
there.
resilience, the other thing that has really helped with my resilience is being part of like a mindfulness meditation community. So I've been part of it for over 10 years and learned the value of meditation, the value of mindfulness. I meditate every day, but I'm also, I just, like you said, I go walking in nature. And when I do, I try so hard to be present, to be, aware of my surroundings and all the beautiful gifts that are there, a kingfisher flying over the river, or, the little scuttle of a little squirrel that stops and looks at me, just being in the moment. And so I think that routine and that practice and that habit really helps a lot, when I'm like, my mind is going with catastrophic thoughts, or, feeling hopeless or helpless or despair, any of those very challenging emotions that we try to get rid of or distract from or run away from, just to sit with them, just to be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, hey, grief is here right now, and despair is here right now, and that's okay. They can be here because they're not going to stay.
Yes.
Everything changes. You just have to allow certain feelings to be there with you.
That you're right, and I agree, of course, with you with all the stuff you say. And I would like to talk about a little bit more about meditation, because now it's like a trending topic
Yeah.
I saw. But as you mentioned, you have been 10 years in this practice, and the other day I realized I have been like a more than 20 years in Cuba. Since Cuba, I started to do yoga, Reiki, and
Mhm.
other practice who is almost all connect aligned.
Of course, yeah.
And I say, before for me it was like my daily life, daily routine,
Yeah.
and now it's everybody talk about that. Let's go to break down a little bit how helpful is for you have that habit. The meditation is help to your writing, is help to your mental health,
Mm.
as you mentioned. But what others benefits you find uh, having good for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, we often within the group, we talk about, like, why are we meditating? Why are we doing this? And
Exactly.
we're doing it to decrease our suffering, because we suffer so much, and we often make ourselves suffer more than we need to. And so I think just acknowledging that, like, wow, I have this suffering or this struggle, just being able to acknowledge that it's normal to feel that way, that we all feel that way, that it's a human condition. And by doing so, you can not make it worse, I guess.
Yes.
And then the other idea, I think, with the practice, is really about that being in the present moment, not being caught up in regrets from the past, not being caught up in worries about the future, just being here in the moment. And then as we do that and we make it a habit, and it becomes something that, appears in our life, like not just when we're doing like a formal practice, but we might be doing something informal, like just taking a quick breathing break or something. But the more that I've practiced, and the more that I have acknowledge my suffering and tried to, help myself and be self-compassionate, the more I'm able to do the things that I want to do and that I value. And that, I think each of us have gifts, and we have gifts that we want to give to the world, or things that we're passionate about, or things that, are our purpose. But if you're struggling and suffering with, whatever, you can't be on that path, right? So just, yeah, big picture, trying to just reduce our suffering a little bit. Not, have you heard about the second arrow, that idea? The
Oh.
So the first arrow is whatever terrible thing happens, but then we often will shoot ourselves with a second arrow, like, why did this happen to me? And I didn't deserve this, and this is so terrible, and we make the suffering worse.
Yes, that's the reason I ask it back that question, because I thought mostly the time is most how we spend the time thinking about the what really happened,
Yes.
and that's drain our energy to
Yes,
write or
exactly.
to create or to enjoy our family or to enjoy. And that's something I realized, and I try to be aware when I catch myself and that kind of thought. I said, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
stop. and do that. You are
Yeah.
here now. We are here in this moment recording this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the only thing I have to think, not
Yeah.
the rest. That's
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah. The other thing is the idea of flow, activities that are flow activities.
mm,
So I read this book and it was about struggling with ruminating, these repetitive thoughts and especially repetitive negative thoughts. And it was a long book and it was actually geared to psychologists. So it was a little bit heavy, but the few sort of tips. One was, being self-compassionate for all that ruminating, but the other was engaging in flow activities, those activities that you do where you kind of lose sense of self, you lose sense of time, you're just in this moment, and that might be for some people, dancing or playing music or, swimming or, playing. But for
playing,
me,
yes.
yeah, playing is a big one for me as well. I still play with my 20-year-old daughter all the time. But writing itself is a flow activity for me, it helps get me out of my head. I mean, I guess I'm going into somebody else's head, but
Yes.
but yeah,
Control.
yeah,
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. How we can connect that with our creative process now as well,
yes.
and that's an amazing idea. Thank you for to share that the flow activity.
Just valuing play, and for most adults, kids, I wouldn't say kids value play. I think they just do
They don't
play,
care.
right? So, but they're not really aware of it. But a lot of adults lose the ability to just be spontaneous and just engage in these playful activities, like going out and climbing a tree or taking, stepping stones of rocks across a river when you're on your walk, or any kind of play.
The simple things in life. Yeah, I call that like a very things we lost. Like we haven't talked all this time about the or lost connection with the nature, and
Yeah.
that's something I know is your big subject as well, and for me as well. And
Yeah.
I try all the time to get back to that and talk about that and be aware that that is important part, and it's not a trending topic now. It's like everywhere, and I feel like oh my god, every time I think something I want to post in social media, it's like everybody having Twitter. It's like, really, that's good.
Yeah.
Something anyway, but it's good. It's a collective thought, and I really would like to see more about that energy now that we are all thinking that nature is important for us now.
Yeah.
Talk about nature. I would like to get back to talk uh, about our connection with animal as you say, you are a lifelong animal lover and also a long time vegan. What you can discover or having observing your interaction with non-human animals, if you have some teaching wise, I call wise teaching, if you have some, how you connect that two things as a lifelong learning.
Yeah. Uh, it's interesting because one of the things that popped into my head was just reading and learning about animals, which is a little bit different though than actually interacting with animals, right? And I love to do both, of course. I love to learn about animals and I love to interact with them and have them in my life. So I think one of the things that pops into my mind is my relationship with the companion animals, the animals that are in my home, and how I get like I'm thinking of a dog, when you leave the house and you come home, that dog greets you with the same enthusiasm every single time,
Yes.
the tail's going, the butt's wiggling, the tongue is out. And I think we have a lot to learn from that, right? Like, can we love with sort of that open heart that these animals have, And also we've been talking about mindfulness, meditation, like being in the moment. And I think again, animals bring us into the present moment, like I'm thinking of meditating, but the cat's right there and the little warm body pressed against my leg and the purring. It really helps just bring me into the present moment. Here's this cat, this this living being, this little bit of consciousness right here beside me. So that's one thing. And then I guess it relates to what you were just saying about, when you're in the natural world trying to connect. And I think, like, I'm thinking of moments when I've encountered animals that have seemed magical. Like, they're moments that, I know I'll remember them forever. And one happened just 2 years ago. I was in Oregon and I was kayaking on this river estuary. So I was crossing from sort of the mainland onto this little spit, and then over that was where the ocean was. And so I was kayaking. I was in the middle, so like maybe 5 minutes out and 5 minutes to get to the other side. And I heard this sound, this like kind of sound, and like this whoosh. And then I heard this slap, and I was like, what's happening? Because I couldn't see anything. And there were seals popping up in the water all around me. And their little faces are so sweet and dog-like, those little whiskered face with the big eyes. And they seem so curious, right? They were looking at me, and I just had this moment, a very profound connection to the water, the river, the ocean, the trees on the other side, the seals all around me, this huge bit of land that went up to this overlook that was, this trail climbing up that way, and myself as part of this. It wasn't that I was separate from it and I was watching it all. I was like in the moment with these animals. And the other thing that makes me think is how connected those animals are to their world. They belong in the wild. They are part of the wild. It's like the water is in them and they are in the water, kind of thing. And that's what we've lost. That's what we've lost as a society, that real connection to our world. Because look at all the trouble we're in with the way that, we treat forests and animals and the ocean, and think of all our pollution, and think of us thinking we're outside of nature or better than nature, or separate from nature. That's, I feel like, the root of a lot of our problems as a society.
Yes, absolutely true. And I agree. That's something we have to keep working more hard, individual and collective, and do that to bring a better planet, a better place, air. It's not never too late. It's kind of sad every time I read the news about how,
of course,
the level, all the stuff happening around, and we can see it in this moment. So it's something, yes, we have to be more aware every day what we consume as a artist as well.
And I guess too, like, the interconnectedness of everything. I think we don't acknowledge that, like, how dependent we are on each other, and dependent we are on the natural world, and how we're connected to it. I'm thinking of Thich Nhat Hanh writing about what he calls interbeing. He's like, the piece of paper has sunshine in it, and it has the tree in it, and it has water in it, and it's interbeing with all of these things, that it couldn't exist without these things. So I really love thinking about things like that.
Yes. No, absolutely. We have to do maybe another episode only to talk about that, because that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to break down that kind of more slow, to the people can understand how impact is. We are all connected. We are all the same. We are even whatever things within, but that's something we have to be aware all the time, that. And something I just realized, that when you describe the seal moment, do you write about that? Do you have some stories that we can enjoy soon?
Do you know what? I wrote about it, but I wrote about it not in, like, I didn't sit down to write about it. I'm part of a writing community with the Writers Collective of Canada, and each Friday I co-facilitate a writing group. And basically, we all get together and we get a writing prompt, and then we write to that writing prompt in 15 minutes. And I can't remember the poem that inspired it, but I did write about the seals in that journal, but I haven't, so I keep that writing separate, I guess, from my professional writing.
Yes.
So that's writing that I do just in a playful way, and, in a spontaneous way. Sometimes I'll take something from there and I might incorporate it into a story, but mostly I don't, because I just want to keep alive that sort of value of creativity as something separate from, I guess, a career or making money. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't
Yes.
want to lose that absolute, love of being creative in the moment.
Yes, yes, I agree with you.
Like, we're not stuck in one place, and especially the more years that you live, the more you may find different things that bring purpose to your life, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also the energy that when you publish something and then the experience of that publication, we didn't talk about that, but maybe I have to invite you again because we have been fooling around with other questions. But
Yeah, there's
yes,
so much to talk about, for sure.
yes, I love to have you again in another moment to talk about publication and how.
Yeah.
But let's go maybe close with them. If you have what is the most rewarding moment for you as a published author?
Oh, huh. That's a
If
great
you,
question. I would have to say the publication of the Napaway Motel. So writing a novel, editing and revising a novel, getting accepted by a publisher, and having this novel. And actually, do you know what? Even more so than having the novel published was when I found it in the Toronto Public Library.
yes,
My heart just swelled. I was so, I guess, honored. I was just thrilled. Here was this book that I've created, and I love the library. I am so devoted to the library, and there was my book
yes.
in the library. That was really a pivotal moment for me.
I think that's a dream for us now.
Mm.
It's a beautiful place. Yes. Oh, that's good. Um, did you have some advice for emerging writer, for people who listen to us today with
Yeah.
Naksha and want to write? And I know you're an amazing teacher because
Yeah, I mean, there's so many bits of advice that I could give. Uh, and certainly it's a little bit different in terms of, I want the craft of writing versus I want to be a writer and get published as a writer. I think, there's different things that are involved in both of those. But I guess maybe I'll just talk about for myself personally. So there was a point I guess it was in my late 40s, and I was just kind of like, what do I want the rest of my life to be? Like, I guess, like a little midlife crisis kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I want to write. I want to take my writing more seriously. I want to actually publish a book. And so one of the things that was really valuable for me was to find the writing community. And there's lots and lots of ways you can do that, but simply taking that first writing course. I took a writing course with the Humber School from Writers. Oh, it's more than 10 years ago now. And the instructor was Wei-Sin Choi. And I went into that
oh yeah,
program. It was a 1 week intensive, but I went in, as someone who loved to write. And I came out with this identity, like, I am a writer. It was really powerful for me. But getting involved in, so taking courses or classes, but connecting with other writers, being part of a critique group is been for me really a great experience. I've had a group of people that I met in that writing class that we stayed connected. So for over 10 years now, we've been a writing group, which has been really wonderful. I would say reading is invaluable to becoming a writer.
yes,
The more you read, I think the better of a writer you will be, just by exposing yourself to different styles, different voices, different ways of telling stories. I think that really can open you up as a writer. Publishing, I think the big thing is to start small. Don't set your sights on, I'm going to get published in the New Yorker or something like that. There's many, many like small, wonderful magazines in Canada I think the CBC publishes a list of them. And so,
Yes.
yeah, that would be one piece of advice around publishing. The other would be, though, is not to send a piece out until it's really, really polished.
Mm.
So I know it's very exciting after you've finished something to think, okay, this is so great, I'm going to send it out. It needs to be, you need to
Yes.
let some other people read it. You know,
Editing.
from our time together, Yannis, during our time writing and reading about animals, you know, we shared our work with each other, and people point out things that you didn't notice, you know. And I know for me, sometimes I've written something and there's a missing piece that I know in my head, but the reader doesn't know. And
Yes,
so
yes.
that's a big one to catch. Like, people get confused. They're like, well, how did this happen? So readers might be confused, they might be bored, they might you know, be able to point out where the writing is awesome. It's like an ABC. It's like, this is amazing,
Yes.
this is boring, this is confusing. You
Yes,
know?
no, but it's amazing you mentioned that, because that's something I always try to tell and be myself aware. It's not when you finish, because all get down down download. I say download from your head to the paper or to the computer, but you have to take your time and editing and revision.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
many authors talk about that. The
Yeah.
revision is the most
Yeah.
important.
And it's not just one revision.
Yeah,
So you don't
revisions.
just like go through and be like, okay, now I've done it.
Yes.
It's really hard to revise your work if you have never done it. And so sometimes, you know, there'll be just this little sort of timid revising where you like
Mm.
change some words, right? Or, you know, take out a sentence. But sometimes the revising has to be really brutal, like a giant restructure. Or, you know, I know writing the novel that I just wrote most recently, I was struggling with one character, and I'd written these 40 pages of, you know, her experience. It was partway midway through the novel. And then I read this wonderful book by George Saunders. I can't quite think of the title, something about rain. Rain is in the title. Sorry, the title's not coming to me,
It's
but
okay. It's
it's a
okay.
book about the writing life and about
Mm.
learning to become a writer and learning how to critique it. And one of the things he said was, you know, we look for causality. We look for reasons, like, why did this happen? Why is this character doing this? How is this connected? And I realized this entire chunk of the novel it didn't connect to anything. It didn't relate to the beginning of the novel. It was more just like a description or a synopsis of her day-to-day life for a little bit of time. And I had
Yes.
to rip out those 40 pages, like, just gone. And that's hard to do, right? When you have invested so much in them. Like, I would have liked just to like tweak it a little bit, but no, I had to pull the whole thing out and write something new. So yeah,
That's the
revision,
hard part. That's
yeah, it is the hard part. You know, there might be something, a sentence that you adore, you know, you love it, you think it's the best thing you've ever written, and someone will be like, this doesn't make sense at this point in the story or whatever, you know. So yeah, that revising, it's good to put it aside, revise, put it aside, revise. You know, if you do have like some beta readers or a critique group,
Mm.
that really helps. So if you're trying to get published, you want that to be the best version of this piece of writing that you can make.
Absolutely. That is an amazing tip. And I really recommend to listen this very careful, because it's true. It's true. Sometimes we saw an amazing books, they are published, but we don't know behind how many
Yes,
times, how they struggle. So we
yes,
only saw when we read like, oh my God, this is perfect. But
yes,
no, when we connect and know the behind the scene, know how was the writing process, how long took, because
yeah,
I feel sometimes the pressure that we have as our author is publish all the time and publish everywhere, and sometimes I feel like I am a slow writer, and I start to honor that myself, because I was kind of struck with that a little bit. But I find like a group, the other authors who say, no, I am slow too. I don't have to publish every month or every week or
yeah,
every
yeah.
year. So that's something the so we have to talk more, because no everybody talk like the ideal writing publishing pathway straight,
Yes,
but it's not a real. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
amazing, Nahat. I can be talking with you all day. That's the truth. I love it. But we kind of I want to be mindful with your time and also with our audience as well. And please, as I say in the beginning, check the Nadja website. You will find a lot of beautiful writing and a beautiful photo of her with a so cute cat.
Oh,
I
yes.
love it. I love that. And you can see. Nadja, having such a pleasure this afternoon and connect with you. Thank you so much for your time. And yes, I hope we can keep talking and we should talk. Program is open for you always, anytime you want to come back. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for your great questions. Wow, it took the conversation in all these different directions, not all of them that I expected to go down, but really interesting, you know. And I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you so much for having me as a guest here. It's wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you now. Thank you for your time.
And I think what I appreciated so much is the intersection between like life and art. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
not just about the creative process, but about being a fuller human being, you know?
Yes. Oh, thank you for telling me that because that's my intention. My purpose with this conversation is not
Yeah.
only show up the artist part or only the or pose as a creator. It's
Yeah.
as a human. Yes, that's my intention. You catch
Yeah.
very well the
Yeah.
energy. Yeah, that's the energy.